visiting the exhibit hall, and it took a little longer than expected, so we appreciate the library taking us in. So if you see any of those folks, please give them a thank you. We have two speakers today, Mark Henning and Evan Van Order. Mark is out of the Miles City NRCS office. He's our area agronomist, and he's also got a pretty good garden going on. So he will show you some demonstrations on how soils act under different management, and then go through a slideshow about gardening.
Wife and 5 kids, 2 dogs, a cat, exchange student, and about 15,000 honeybees as of last night. So those are my livestock as far as it goes. But we're going to talk about soil and how to garden with the health of the soil in mind. So if you're like me, perhaps I grew up with a backyard garden that my parents managed and a rototiller. I do not own a rototiller now and don't plan to buy one, so we'll talk about what that looks like. I'll talk about how I kind of work in my garden and things I do not to disturb that soil and try to keep it healthy and hopefully less work for me in the long run. But first, I'm going to talk a little bit about soil and what it is. What were you taught in school about soil? What's it made of? Stuff. Okay. What kind of stuff? What's in it?
Dirt.
Dirt. Okay, dirt's the stuff that your mom tells you to sweep out the door or clean up, that you track in. So that's the physical part of soil, right? All soil is got sand, silt, and clay of different amounts. Sand is the biggest, silt is the next smallest, and clay, that sticky stuff. And some of our cropland that you walk on makes you about 3 inches taller. Okay? That gumbo clay, that's the smallest particle. And that's often what the focus is on, is that physical part of soil. It's the percentage of sand and silt and clay. You've got a clay loam or a loam, and that's a lot of the emphasis in NRCS in the past, was that physical part of the soil. But what makes soil actually is the things that live in it. And if you've got a pretty decent garden, you're probably used to seeing earthworms, hopefully, in there, and they're great. And that's kind of the biggest thing we're used to seeing. But it goes down from there in terms of size, but increases in numbers. So you've got bacteria, which are the most numerous. You've got fungi, not mushrooms so much, but other things. You've got protozoa, single-celled organisms that hunt the bacteria and eat them. You've got nematodes. We used to think of those as bad, but there's actually, most of them are really good and do a lot of good things in the garden. You've got small shredding insects. Again, there are some of the bad guys out there that we don't like to see flying around or chewing on our crops, but on the whole, most of the life that's out there is usually pretty good, and it's needed to make soil soil. So I want to focus more on biology and kind of the things we do that impact that biology. But first, kind of back to what makes soil soil. There's a plant. Anybody know what this is, by the way? Pansy? No? It's kind of suffering because it needs to get out of this pot. But this is Phacelia, annual Phacelia. Maybe that's another common name for it, but bees love it. Okay, but if you think again back to high school biology, you know, plants make their own food, right? They're going to take sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water, and they're going to make their own food, mainly just simple sugars. Okay, so where does that food go? Which parts of the plant is it going to move that sugar to? Right? It's going to put a lot of it up here to grow more things. Okay. But depending on what kind of plant you are, you're going to put anywhere from 10, 20, 30, 40, maybe 50% of it down below ground into the root system. And it doesn't just stay in the roots, it actually leaks out into the soil. It's just this simple sugar liquid that literally just leaks out of the roots. Now, why would a plant do that? It's giving away food. Any ideas? NRCS people don't answer. We've heard this before, so.
In order to make the next seeds prosper better.
Partially, I mean, it is going to move food up to make those seed heads and flowers and that sort of thing. But why is it dropping so much energy down below ground through its root system? When really we're always used to looking up here. If I asked you to draw your favorite plant, you probably would start with this, right? Not down below. Okay. So what's going on is as it's leaking these sugars out. Remember, these are simple sugars, kind of like you've eaten so far today. It's feeding all of the biology underground. Okay. it's giving that food away. Now, it doesn't give it away for free. There's a little exchange that goes on, okay? These simple sugars leak out of the roots, which attracts all kinds of things around those roots to feed on those sugars. But in return, all those microbes, your bacteria and your protozoa and all kinds of things, give nutrients back to the plant. Because plants are really inefficient when it comes to scavenging for things like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, calcium, you name it. The roots don't reach a lot of the soil, okay? The roots are big compared to the spaces in between soil. And by leaking out those simple sugars, you attract the biology, which you can go a lot of different places in the soil and bring those nutrients to the plant. So it's just a trade-off. It's some simple, give and take going on between the plant and all the biology underground. Okay, so without that biology and without those plant roots, you don't have soil, you have dirt. Okay, so if you think about living things, they all need food, water, and shelter, right? Something to kind of learn to get back to basic biology. If you think about wildlife habitat, sometimes you put food plots out there for pheasants or deer or what have you, and we plant plants to attract things. They need a water source, and they need a place to live. Okay, so the biology in the soil is the same way, all right? But if you were to look at soil up close, you'd see a lot of airspace in a healthy soil. About 25% of the space is airspace. So these big styrofoam balls would be sand, these would be silt, and these flat ones would be clay particles. They look flat under a microscope, okay? But there's a lot of empty space in here. And so your bacteria and your protozoa and all these little critters, okay, below ground can go these places where roots cannot. These green things would be a certain type of fungi that puts out hyphae or strands into the soil that we can't see. But these guys actually connect right into a plant root, like a pipeline, and go out into the soil and bring things back, especially phosphorus, okay, which is important for plant growth and development. So this is habitat right here, okay, but habitats vary in their quality, right? So if we look at some different soils, I've got 3 different ones here. Now what do you see right off the bat that's different? What's different? Color, right? Okay. Remember I talked about carbon? What color is coal? It's black, right? Okay. Yeah, the one here and the pasty one is the same texture. There's silky clay along with the middle one. I can't remember. From my garden. I think it's silky clay or something. But back to those simple sugars, they're mainly composed of carbon. That the plant is pulled out of the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, transforms it into something they can use. A lot of that ends up in the soil. Okay? But depending how you manage that habitat or that soil is how much carbon is going to stick around in the soil. So this really pasty one here, in terms of its management, this comes from an irrigated farm south of Billings. It's a research farm, and they do a lot of grass seed production. A lot of our perennial grasses that people plant, some of the seed originates there. So they do a lot of intensive tillage to the soil, a lot of physical disturbance to have a clean seed bed so they don't have, western wheatgrass contaminating something else. Okay, so a lot of tillage, it's irrigated, not a lot of crop diversity. Okay, pretty much our cool season grasses and that's it, and a lot of tillage. This one comes from a no-till farm in eastern Montana, in Weeville County. It's had a history of small grains and peas and or lentils, and hasn't been tilled for 10 plus years. Okay, and it comes from a dryland farm. So similar soil types in terms of their physical characteristics, but very different management. Okay, and this one's a lot denser as well. So we're going to put this in water and see how it reacts. Okay. This one here, that one there. This is the one from my garden, which hasn't been really disturbed much in a number of years. So what do you notice right off with this one from the intensively tilled system? It's just falling apart. Why would it do that? Yet these two seem to be holding on. There's a few small pieces coming off. And you can't see this, but there's air bubbles poking up out of each of these. Remember I said soil was about 25% airspace? So what holds all those particles together?
Air?
No, the air's coming out, right? Water comes in, displaces the air, which creates an internal pressure, okay? So if the habitat isn't well built, it's going to fall apart. And what builds that habitat is, we go back to the biology. They produce a lot of different compounds, and a lot of these things are basically like glue that stick the soil particles together, okay? Enable it to absorb water without coming apart like this, okay? So this will probably be gone in the next 5 to 10 minutes, I'm pretty sure. So because the system has been so disturbed and worked, microbes don't really like that. It's kind of like if I burned your house down, you would leave, right? Okay? Tillage to microbe is kind of like a earthquake and fire and tornado all at once. Not a lot really deals with it very well. And the people at this research farm will tell you they haven't seen earthworms in years, okay, because of the intensive tillage. All right, now they started to add some different plant types to their system and some cover crops. I think each of you should have gotten a package of seed. We'll talk about cover crops later in your bag. But that's adding more diversity and more life to the soil, and they're starting to see some earthworms come back. Okay, because they're changing the management in their habitat and how they treat that soil. Soil can bounce back fairly quickly if you treat it right. Yeah, that's still going. So, I have over here, we're going to illustrate some rainfall. So this one here, it matches this here, okay? It's the same soil. This one matches this one. I've broken it up. I've got holes in the bottom of these containers, and we're going to make it rain, because when it rains, you want that rain to go in, like right now. This is great what we're getting. But let's see what the management difference does when we make it rain. Well, what happened? This one is ponding, right? It's that surface, because it's basically been mixed up like in a blender because of the tillage. You've destroyed the structure. You've gotten rid of the pore space, the empty space in there more or less. And so when the water hits the surface, it's not even hitting at the speed of a raindrop. It kind of seals that surface off, and the water can't go in. Eventually it will seep through. It'll take a few minutes. Okay? But what we've basically done, we'll call these biological glues, okay? Silly string. All those microbes producing that great stuff. But when you disturb soil, you wake up a bunch of other microbes that like to eat the glues. Okay, they kind of chow down on those glues. They're generally kind of sleeping, kind of like my kids do during chores, since we call dessert, right? Okay, and when you go through it with a rototiller or a plow or a disc or whatever, and you destroy this, all these particles become sort of disassociated from each other. The glues get eaten and destroyed. There's nothing to hold the soil together. And then when water hits that surface, it seals off. Okay? And later, when we have a break, come look at the surface of these two soils and they'll look very different. Okay? So this one went all the way through, went right through that profile very, very nicely, because there's good, healthy structure. And again, that is driven by biology, which is going to be very dependent on how that soil is managed. Okay? So we see this effect occasionally in Montana when we get a big downpour, and if your land has any slope to it, where does it go? It goes downhill, doesn't it? And it takes the soil with it, and then if you're involved in farming, it takes any inputs with it, and eventually it finds its way to the Yellowstone River. But even with a good healthy system, even if you do have a slope to that soil, it's hilly, it's going to go in a well-managed farm, okay? Because that soil has not been disturbed. The biology's had time to build that structure for you. And you'll find this will grow better crops with less water, and will be very resilient in the drought year, whereas this one is going to be the insurance check you might have to collect, okay? Any questions so far? So this is continuing to kind of call slaking or fall apart, and it'll probably be gone by the time we're done today, if not sooner.
Your yard is doing it.
This one here?
Yeah.
That hasn't fallen apart at all. There's a few big pieces that have come off, but compared to this one right here, you notice how cloudy that is. All the soil is kind of there's just no structure here. This is holding together. All that water went in, put pressure inside that soil structure, and it held together because those biological glues are still there. They haven't been eaten up by biology. And the one from Weevil County is doing fine as well. So, and this again comes back to management. There's been very little physical disturbance to these soils. There's been a diversity of different plants, and we'll talk about why that's important later. Again, this one hasn't seen the plant diversity. So the microbes have a lot of different choices of what they're going to eat, and there's a lot of tillage. So you're emphasizing certain microbes that are going to eat those glues, right? So again, you do see a few bigger aggregates coming off, which is normal, but as a whole, it's staying together. So, and these were dry to start; they weren't wet. So, any questions so far? But it's really important to understand what soil is and how it functions, and that the biology really supplies nutrients, it makes water available to plants, it fights pests and diseases, and if you treat that biology right, it does a lot of good things for you. And we're used to thinking the most limiting nutrient is nitrogen in our, whether it's our gardens or our farms, but really it's carbon. Okay, remember the color of these soils, this one had a lack of carbon. And I guarantee if you did a soil test and showed how much organic matter, a measure of the carbon in the soil, this would be probably 1% or lower. I'm guessing this one 3% or higher, perhaps. I'm not sure what mine would be, but probably up in that range. Get these out of the way. Here. Continue to watch them. Again, look at these here when you get a chance. You'll see very different surfaces. We'll put them back up during the break. They'll probably even smell different. Healthy soil should smell nice. Projector going. There you go. Okay. So this section I want to talk kind of 4 principles about soil health and how you should treat soil, and then how I kind of manage my garden. Okay, so we'll go through each of these 4 principles, and I'll try to apply them kind of to the gardening level of things. But we're going to talk about it in terms of not digging the garden, not rototilling it. So when we're managing for soil health, there's 4 principles that we need to keep in mind to try to use at whatever kind of farming, ranching system you have. One is minimize that disturbance, so that involves not in terms of a garden, not using a rototiller or spading it. Maximizing diversity. In the garden, that's not actually too difficult. You grow a lot of different things, but there's some ways you can add more diversity. Living roots in the soil. Remember, when we talked about those roots putting those carbon compounds, those sugars in the soil, the more often you do that, the more you're feeding that underground herd, okay, the micro herd, if you want to call them that, all that biology, okay, the better off they're going to be. And then keep the soil covered, okay. I think we all know mulch is a good thing in the garden. Keeps weeds down, keeps the moisture in, so we'll talk about that. But basically, you're creating habitat for what you could call the soil food web, for all those biological critters that live down there. So when you stop tilling, what happens? A number of things happen. Those soil pores remain continuous, those spaces between soil particles down below, okay, they're not connected. Soil aggregates, that's that structure, okay, they're not destroyed, they actually begin to form. Your soil food web, or the microbes, you get a lot of different things in there that you didn't used to have, just like the research center didn't have earthworms, now they're starting to see some earthworms come back. Weed seeds are not planted. Weeds love to be tilled up, which gives them a little boost of nitrogen, exposes them, and off they go. Okay, that's a perfect habitat for a weed. Water is captured and stored in these low disturbance systems, just like we saw with the little rainfall simulator. Okay, that water is going to go into the profile where you want it. Your soil fungi and earthworms increase, and these small insects or microarthropods also increase, and they're responsible for a lot of what we call nutrient cycling, means making those nutrients that plants need available. Okay, when you have all your kind of residue from the year left over in the garden, you've got tomato vines and different things. There's a lot of things, insects, that can shred that into smaller particles that can then other things can munch on them, which makes those nutrients available to plants. So, why do we think this sort of operation is needed? Right? It's very, it's something that I grew up doing in my parents' garden, but it's really hard on worms and soil structure. It's probably one of the most destructive implements out there, actually, because of the way it churns the soil. It even creates a nice compaction layer where those tines hit. You can set it as low as you want, but you always create a compaction layer wherever those tines are hitting as they rotate. It dries the soil out, costs money. Again, it's really great at planting weed seeds. You have to come back and do it again. So how do you start? If you want to start a garden new without tillage, what are your options? Okay, so there's a couple things that you can do. You can cover your area, if it's sod or grass. You can cover it with weed fabric, cardboard. You can use newspaper as a layer, plus some manure or compost, and maybe some wood chips on top of that to hold things down. And that will kill that sod out over time. It takes a while, but it works. You could use herbicide. Glyphosate's just a common name for Roundup. Pretty easy to use, pretty cheap. But again, if you don't want to use chemicals, there's a way to do it by just covering that ground. Some of your perennial broadleaves might be a bit of a struggle, like bindweed. I've got bindweed in my garden. I'll probably fight that for a while. So those are kind of the two ways that you can go with it. If you want to start something new out there, those are your options. Now, one thing about if you're going to use herbicide, make sure you read those labels. As I found out when I sprayed out some strips in my lawn to kind of extend the garden, just with a simple sprayer, put tomatoes in there, and the tomatoes grew and didn't really produce fruit. And if you read the label on this generic Roundup, there's a little asterisk by tomato, and it says wait 30 days for rooted tomato transplants. So you make sure whatever you do, you read what's on that bottle, okay? Because it does make a difference. Okay, most things not such a big deal. You're looking at 3 days for seed or 1 day. It kind of depends on what you got, but really pay attention to the fine print. Okay, very important. So minimize disturbance. How do you put seed in the ground? I can show you how I do it, and there's other ways to do this. I just use a spade right here. This is my garden in Miles City, and I just put a little furrow in the ground like that. Okay. Now notice I've got a pretty good layer through here to cover that soil. Remember that principle about mulching. Okay. That's kind of just the top view. And this is great in the spring for seeding things like lettuce, snow peas, any kind of green, cold hardy things that like this time of year. It's a pretty easy thing to do. I don't have to till that up and make a furrow, and and it's just not doesn't take a lot of work or effort. Those are no-till snow peas right there, sweet peas that came up just fine. Okay, it is important I find to put a little layer of mulch over where you put that slot. So wherever you're doing this, I like to kind of scrape some of this stuff back over the top to keep it. That just helps keep the moisture in and help that seed germinate. And things come up really nicely. So this is my son and I. We're planting. This is last year. I put it in cover crop seed because we have this kind of window of. It depends on the year. Late March through mid-May to late May, when a lot of things just don't go in because they're going to get frosted. So you have this nice cool time where you have a window to put something in that can again put living roots in the ground. So we seeded a bunch of mainly hairy vetch That's my down pressure. If you know what that term means, it has to do when you put a planting implement in the ground, you need to have some weight to it, right? So that cinder block is my down pressure. Makes it a little easier since we're doing a lot. That's March 29th of last year, and we planted this mainly with hairy vetch, which is a really great plant. I'll have pictures of that. That was September of that same year. So all this is that's not weeds, it's mainly hairy vetch. And that's a legume, which means it takes nitrogen and puts it in the soil for free, essentially. Most plants can't do that, like a pea, wood, or a lentil. And those are my tomatoes right here. And it's a viney thing, and it can overwinter and it'll produce its own seed, and bees love it. And it will climb up into your plants. You can kind of see it right here. It has a nice flower. It can be a little obnoxious, but I just kind of, as I'm going through the garden, I'll tear some out if it's getting too entangled with some of my plants. But it doesn't really affect production at all that I've noticed. And if anything, it keeps weeds down in between my rows because I've got something else growing that I want versus bindweed or kochia or Russian thistle. Okay. So minimize disturbance. This is another way, and I've never used one of these. It's called a jab planter. You can get them from seed catalog companies. And it's good for large seeds. Evan, do you have one of these?
I've got different versions right there.
Okay, yeah, he'll have some that he can show you. So this is a way if you're doing corn or beans or peas, you can do it quickly. That's in a tilled system, obviously, but it basically, you punch it into the ground and you release the seed and go to the next one. This was a garden in North Dakota that started out with this kind of sod. Okay, and they used Roundup, and they ended up with this right here. No rototilling, no spading, no disturbance at all, and it did just fine. Performed really well for them. So that's kind of a visual example of what you start with, and it's kind of like a lawn, and you can end up with this. But notice they've got it well mulched. Really important. So maximize diversity. Nature doesn't like uniformity. Nature will try to put diversity into the system for you. Okay, if you enforce a monoculture, she'll bring weeds and other things in there. Now in a garden, again, that's usually not too difficult, but we can actually add more diversity through cover crops. But again, this is really about the microbes. Okay, there's this trade-off that occurs with the microbes and the plants. They're trading sugar for nutrients. Okay, and a lot of that gets converted to organic matter, which makes that soil nice and dark and rich. But you need microbes need a diversity of food just like we do. If all we fed you was donuts for a month, you would not feel healthy, would you? Even for a week. Microbes are the same way. They need a diversity of food sources like any living creature. Okay? So those plants, every plant has its own type of compounds that it drops out of its roots. Okay? So you need a diversity of those plant compounds to support a diverse community below ground. So, again, if you want to maximize diversity in a garden, that isn't really too difficult because we're kind of doing that already with a variety of vegetables. But you can maximize diversity in time as well. I usually have like an early seedings of cold hardy things and late seedings of cold hardy things. So that's like these Asian greens and lettuce. During the year, I like to look for empty space in the garden. I don't like just bare ground. I wanted something growing there, or I want it covered with mulch. So for example, I'll transplant hot peppers between my garlic rows because garlic really doesn't shade anything out, I have enough space to put those transplants in, and the garlic doesn't mind, the peppers don't mind, and it makes use of the limited space I have. Sometimes I get volunteer lettuce showing up in different places. I just let it go, thin it out. Why not? It didn't require any work to plant it. You can plant peas with potatoes or cabbage, and it doesn't seem to bother them at all. And then cover crops is the other option. So here's just some late seedings, and if you've got a way to protect these from the cold, then you can go even longer. That's late September, and those are ready to harvest right there. That's like a pak choi. Here's garlic. You notice the space between the rows right here. Easy to put some peppers in there because this garlic isn't going to shade anything out. It's in this space right there. Like I said, I don't like empty space, and so here I've got Brussels sprouts growing. Here's some Asian greens I've started. Then I put in a cover crop of buckwheat. This is the annual, not the weed, okay? Which honeybees really like it. There's tomatoes over here, so I put this line in here. And if it gets kind of too tall and shady, then I'll just cut it. It's really easy to kill. It grows fast, it flowers continuously, but very simple cover crop. Well, if I don't want it there, I'll just clip it and just lay it down, and it becomes mulch at that point.
You don't do anything with it?
No, no. I want that to stay in the garden and cover the soil. And eventually it'll get cycled back into the soil, provide nutrients for plants. I intercrop. I put popcorn and pole beans together. This is the south side of my house, so it warms up quite a bit there. So here's pole beans binding up the corn right there. This is a simple PVC irrigation system we put together. There was a handout on that. Pretty low cost system to use. Okay, next principle, living roots. Having those roots in the ground, remember, we're feeding the microbes, okay? It does a lot of different things. But really, what you're after is improving the properties of your soil by having those living roots in the ground, okay? And that's not just in time, but in space. Like I said, I don't like to have a lot of empty space in my garden. I need enough to work and move around. But, that low-growing hairy vetch, I can walk all over it and it doesn't really care. It's pretty hardy. So how to do that? Again, with cover crops, in the spring we don't have a lot going on in the garden. I've got my garden's about 30 by 40 feet, and I don't want to plant the entire thing to lettuce. Okay, that's a lot of lettuce. So, that one year I put in a whole bunch of vetch, but there's a lot of other cool season crops you could mix in with it if you like, that grow well this time of year. Okay, they like this cool, wet weather. I've tried underseeding or interseeding in late summer with varying success, just kind of broadcasting it out there and trying to cover it. And I get some germination, but not as much as if it's in the ground. And then, living roots in terms of time and sequencing, once something's done, I try to put something else in. Once the lettuce bolts, get rid of it, plant some beans or radishes or something that's going to go really quick. Try to fill that space in. So here's an example. There's actually something there you can eat. All right, it looks messy, but it's still a good thing. There's hot peppers over here. I've got pak choi right here. Here's some hairy vetch through here, and I've got buckwheat. There's radishes as a cover crop, and some cowpeas, which is a legume crop, or black-eyed peas. And I eventually probably clip that and just let it lay down on the surface so that the peppers and the pak choi can get more sunlight. So. But again, that's putting living roots in the ground where normally that might be bare. These are peas with radishes. Kind of just let those go together in that instance. But notice the soil cover again as well. In terms of seed sources, there's a lot of different places you can get seed. There's just some examples. Not endorsing anyone, but you can hunt around and a bunch of companies out there that will sell you small lots of seed. Or in Miles City, you can go to Westfeeds now, they'll sell you 50 pounds of peas or oats, which is quite a bit, but it's here. So, but if you want smaller lots, you can go to some of the seed catalog companies. So keep the soil covered. This is really, really important. It does a lot of things. It keeps weeds down, it conserves moisture, it cools the soil, provides habitat. That mulch layer is great habitat for a lot of different microbes and insects. It protects that soil structure. The impact of a raindrop is about 20 miles an hour. So even on a healthy soil, when it's exposed, you can break that surface structure and it begins to seal off. And then rain will have a harder time getting in. So if you did a temperature check, this is kind of fascinating. This has got a canopy and this does not. It's like a 20-degree difference. This exposed soil in the middle of summer is 107 degrees with that soil thermometer stuck in the ground. That's pretty toasty. If I turn the temperature up here at 107 degrees, we'd be outside having our workshop, right? But in that canopy, we're down to about 87 to 88 degrees, which is really nice for the soil microbes. You get less water loss to the air by reducing that temperature. Much more favorable habitat. And just as temperature increases, that is good for microbes to a point. right? But when you get up in this 100-degree plus range, a lot of your moisture is lost, and even some bacteria start dying. Okay, so microbes do not like hot soil any more than we like hot temperatures. So mulching, keeping that soil covered is critical. This was a colleague, he's retired now in North Dakota, but he mulches his garden heavily, all through it. And that's really important, I think, to keep that soil temperature cool, helps with weed control, and that's kind of what mine looks like. And again, that was no-till, probably an Asian green of some sort that I planted, just using a spade, covered up my little slot, and it comes right through without any issues at all. Another look at it. This is what I don't like to see in my garden. But we have windstorms, so things blow off and they're hard to anchor. This is what I like to see here, right? Looks kind of trashy and messy, but it's a good thing. Okay, but when it's exposed, it begins to look like this. And just even closer, this is garlic coming up in the spring. This is covered with some compost and other crop residues. This is not. You begin to see it's probably rained and it's kind of sealed that surface off slightly. I can repair that pretty easily with just mulch and compost, but I don't like to see that. You know, but again, we get wind, so things get blown around in my garden. But I leave my tomato plants, my pepper plants, all my viney crops, I just leave them there, right? Just let them go over winter. And I think it's better not to clip them at the base and just let them stay anchored, because then they won't blow into the next county. So, again, you can use hairy vetch. It's a really nice cover. That's more hairy vetch. That's showing it around a Brussels sprout. That's the hairy vetch this year. And the nice thing about the hairy vetch is that it'll die back in the winter, but it stays anchored to the ground. Okay, so it's not going to blow away. And now it's beginning to come back right now. It's starting to green up. Okay. And again, if it gets kind of too obnoxious, I can take a weed whacker to it if I want. And there's that nice cover. That's what I like to see. It's kind of what I would like to see in the entire garden, but we'll get there. And this is soil structure after about 5 years of no-till. This one is kind of a little better. You see the nice kind of like chocolate cake almost. Okay.
Yeah.
That was that soil that didn't fall apart up here. I checked the infiltration. This is where we take a 6-inch ring and we put the equivalent of an inch of water in it and time it, and we calculate in inches per hour. So if we had a rainstorm of 73 inches an hour, it would all go in. That's what that's saying right there. It's not going to pond at the surface. A little bit about compost. Everyone's going to focus on this, so but I'll kind of tell you what I do. Compost is really about feeding the biology or feeding the microherd. That's what it is. It's providing food and structure for microbes. And so I kind of maintain 2 piles. One's kind of the active pile that we're always adding to, and one's sort of the pile that's cooking, whether fast or slow. And you can make this go really fast, or if you just want to kind of take it easy, it can go really slow. So it's kind of up to your time and how much you want to put into it. But that's 138 degrees with about an 8-inch probe. So it's cooking. Now, that is probably from manure, everything that came out of the chickens after processing, chicken guts, skins, feathers, you name it, and probably some shredded paper. Okay? So you can put animal products and that kind of thing into compost. We do all the time, but you've got to balance it out with enough carbon to avoid nasty smells and other things happening. But you can really get compost going very rapidly if you want to. The main kind of restriction here is our water, right? Because it's a dry climate. If you don't water compost, it kind of shuts down and goes really, really slow until it rains or you water it. And it's got to be turned. But I think, Evan, you'll show this later, right? This is kind of what compost should be made up of. You kind of want to be careful of too much of the high nitrogen things. Coffee grounds are great for that. This is where the kind of chicken guts fell into in my pile, is the high nitrogen stuff. But I had enough brown and green or high carbon things to kind of balance that out, because it is about a balance between how much carbon and nitrogen goes into your compost. If you want to kill weed seeds, you need about 140 degrees in 30 days, is what I've read. So I'm not always that patient, so I do bring weeds into the garden sometimes, or probably every year, but it's not too bad. A little bit about season extension. I'll go over this briefly, and then a little bit about what vegetable varieties I like, because gardeners like to share that. Things that I've really liked, that have worked. A lot of different ways to extend your season. You can use high tunnels, you can use low tunnels. They're generally not heated and they don't cost a lot. So I just use low tunnels to get things started. Okay, pretty simple. This is a 4-year poly, which means it's good for 4 years. It won't break down in the sun in the first year. If you just go to the hardware store and buy clear plastic, it'll be done within a year probably. Okay. I've used sandbags to anchor it down. Right now I think I'm using posts and cinder block. But that's kind of your dimensions. This is just half-inch electrical conduit. Bends really nicely. But if you're going to use plastic hoops, you have to paint this plastic. Otherwise it'll interact with this plastic sheeting and it tends to break it down. But this kind of gives me a jump on things. They do have to be vented. You know, on a sunny day in the 50s or 60s, you can cook your plants really quickly. All right, so that's important. It's not something you can just kind of forget about and walk away from. But again, notice the mulch in here, keeping the soil covered. And that's May 27th. So it gives me a nice jump on getting things going early or protecting them late. Okay, varieties I like. These are some things that I've grown that seem to do well. There's a number of melons, particularly this one seems to do really, really good in my garden. Some of these winter squash, which are more bush type, so they don't explode and take over your entire yard. I really like this paste tomato, but it is a hybrid, but it's about to go off the market, unfortunately. And there's a number of Asian greens and hot peppers that seem to do well in Miles City. You can find all of these in seed catalogs. That's just a picture of that melon, Hannah's Choice. It's a nice, dense melon. If you like cantaloupe flavor and smell. If you don't, then don't get this one. That's kind of, it's got some disease resistance. This is a standard kind of hybrid, and it just totally fell down to some disease, to powdery mildew, which we do see that sometimes here. And this stands up really nice. That's a Delicata Squash, but it's a bush-type plant. So again, it doesn't explode and go 20 feet in all directions. It's more of a bush habit. And it also has some nice disease resistance too. That's the traditional Delicata that vines out. And this one does vine out a little, but not like the old one does. And we know what that plant is. Nope. That's Phacelia again. So, but it's flowering. And so honeybees really, really like it. And just kind of a plug for pollinators. There's a lot of great things you can plant in your garden, around your garden, at borders that will bring in things like honeybees, but other things that will take out kind of the bugs we don't like. You know, there's a lot of different flowers that bring in predators. That gives them food and shelter, and then they will go after the things that kind of give us headaches in our gardens. So, you know, looking for flowers to plant, there's a lot of good choices out there to put in, you know, whether there's annuals or perennials, to kind of bring in the good guys to take care of some of the bad guys.
Do honeybees like that better than like regular flowers?
They like this.
Zinnia or
Yeah, I've heard this is what researchers plant when they want to study honeybees. They plant Phacelia, the annual Phacelia. Now there's a bunch of perennial types, but this one, honeybees, just that's what the first thing they go after, I think. And it's just really, really attractive to them. I think because of the flower structure and its color, the bees really hone in on it. So it is an annual. It's going to frost chill on you, but now it's about the time to plant it. It doesn't like warm soil temperatures to germinate. I think we have some door prize seed packets of this, right, Cammie?
Yep.
Okay. So, any questions? Whites, maybe. Yes, what's that?
What did you say that you used PVC to keep it from wearing?
Oh, yeah, on those low tunnels, if you're going to do a low tunnel system and you're going to use plastic, well, if you're going to use plastic, you got to paint it. some sort of a plastic paint that will stick to it. Because the poly sheeting and the plastic pipe are different plastics, so they'll chemically interact, which can break down that plastic sheeting. So it's important to just spray paint it with some sort of a plastic type thing, you know, that will stick to it, because some things won't stick to plastic.
Can you get that seed from Territorial?
You'd have to see if they have to seal it. I don't know. It's a very tiny seed. It's how many seeds per pound? It's maybe a million, or I don't know. It's pretty small stuff. Maybe half a million, but we've got some packets of it. So, but yeah, Johnny's or Churchill might carry that. There's a company in California, it's called Grow Organic or Organic Supply or something like that, who has a lot of different cover crops. So it's a, yeah, I still have to get mine in the ground, haven't gotten there yet. Very attractive to honeybees. Rocky.
Do you use any chemical or fertilizer?
I've used a little bit of Miracle-Gro starter, like, because I still dig a hole for my transplants, right? And you gotta dig a hole to put a tomato plant in. So I'll sacrifice the biology in that place to get tomatoes. And I'll use the watering can with some Miracle-Gro solution in there just as a starter. I don't know that I'll do it this year. I'm not sure if I need to anymore. But initially, I think if you're going this way, you might want to do that the first couple of years, just as that. And Miracle-Gro is mainly about the phosphorus, which plants need initially to get going, get established. Nitrogen, there is some in there. But I have used some BT insecticide, which is it's a toxin produced by a bacteria that's been made into a product. And I have used some of that for cabbage loopers, I think once maybe, but that's it. Because cabbage loopers seem to really like, they go after your Brussels sprouts and cabbage and that sort of stuff, but not real heavy, no. I think I did that once maybe.
So what kind of water are you using?
It's city water from Mile City. Yeah.
So it's all chlorinated and...
Yeah, it is, yep. Yeah, it's been built, it's been treated and all that. And so, yeah, I've been using an overhead sprinkler system. I think I'm going to go to drip this year. Any question here?
So you have a mulch of 2 inches, it's been there for a while?
Well, it comes and goes because, the more active and busy your soil gets, the quicker it munches on stuff.
So it's there. So you go to plant seeds in it.
Right.
You peel that back. Does that seed have to have some dirt on it, not just mulch?
Ideally it's in the soil.
Yeah.
Okay. Then you get the seed to soil contact, and seed needs humidity, not so much contact with soil as it needs the humidity. The soil keeps that humidity in there. And then, I like to put some mulch over that seed slot. You can broadcast and try to mulch over it. I've done some of that, but it just seems to I get better results if it's in the ground.
So doing a crop rotation, leaving the residue down, do you have any
disease issues?
Or corn don't do well beside, going behind a potato or something. I'm just using.
Yeah, my space is so confined that rotation is kind of hard to do. So,
okay.
I'm going to have tomatoes in the same place year after year, but if I keep the cover crop thing going, and if I do add compost to the garden, that should take care of things. I don't see the massive crop failure from diseases. We're sort of fortunate out here that we don't have a lot of the diseases. I grew up in upstate New York, which is like a tropical rainforest here. And so we have late blight, early blight on tomatoes, just things that will just take out tomatoes. And it's so dry here, that's kind of that's one benefit of it being dry, is our disease pressure isn't so bad.
But another plant decomposing isn't going to hinder the growth of a different plant?
Typically not, no. Yeah. There are some crops out there that can inhibit some things sometimes, but it's usually, you have to have a solid planting of one thing, and the crop residue has to be there. And in a garden, you usually don't have that. If you're concerned about disease and you knew you had some diseased plants, you can clip those and throw them in the compost. And there's plenty of fungi that will go after those diseased plants and break things down for you. So, regular, yes, ma'am.
You said that you leave your tomato plants over winter, but do you leave those as mulch in your garden?
I will, yeah. Yep. Right now, I kind of scraped a lot of stuff off to kind of go after some perennial grasses and weeds that I tracked in with some Roundup. So they're off to the side now. I'll put them back pretty soon here. But
How long does it take that stem of your plant to break down?
your Brussels sprouts seem to take the longest. It's like a tree. They just hang around. It's like compost. They hang around a long time. But you know, it's around, but it just gradually breaks down over the summer as I put water down, as things grow. I mean, a lot of that stuff just begins to disappear. I mean, I have, you know, I put grass clippings down too, and they can disappear really quickly because they're so fresh and green. Things like, you know, barley or wheat straw will hang around longer, of course, but it tends to blow away as well. So you have to be careful. But, yeah. I have heard. If you want to put seed in the ground, you can use a large pizza cutter too. That's a really narrow slot. It tends to wear them out, I think. But I do know somebody who has done that. So, yeah. There really isn't a small garden drill that's going to work. A stick's great. You just punch holes and drop your peas in or your beans. Yeah. So it doesn't take a lot of soil disturbance to get seed in the ground, really.
So if you go from a tilled situation,
Yep.
and you're going into a no-till,
Okay.
you have that year of hard pan?
There's a
How-
transition, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, because if you have worked it year after year, there is a compaction layer somewhere or hard pan.
Right.
So that's going to take time to heal, and you know. But the more you can mulch, if you really want to, you can put some sunflowers in that have a taproot. There's radishes that have taproots. You know, if you've heard about the cover crop mixes that farmers use, sometimes they use these taprooted radishes. They're like this big. If you're going to do that, plant them after July 1st or so. Because if you plant them about before that time, roughly, they will bolt. They'll flower, and they will have a kind of a little spindly root. If you want a big, you know, those daikon radishes with the huge white roots on them, plant those later in the summer, and then they'll go down instead of up, because I think it's a day length thing. So I'm not talking the little red radishes; they won't do much for you for a taproot.
Right.
But those big white radishes, icicle or daikon or whatever, they'll go deep and help, you know, fracture that compaction layer. And then sunflowers are nice in any garden, I think, and they attract pollinators as well, and they have a taproot. But there, yeah, if you're going to convert, there's going to be some transition, just like we tell people who go from conventional farming to no-till farming. You know, for them, it can be anywhere from 3 to 5 years, depending on what they do. Now, in a garden, you'll have water, and you've got access to diversity pretty easily, so that will help. And if you're mulching and composting, that can really speed the process up, I think. But expect to have a lot of weeds initially, especially the annuals. So, I mean, if you want to use weed cloth between your rows or something to keep that to a minimum, then go for it. So.
I'm on the 3rd year of no-till.
Okay, keep at it. but remember, if you know, keep adding diversity and food material for that biology, because just like kind of like at the farming level, we've seen people do no-till and fail. It's because they didn't add diversity to the system, change some
We're
other things.
trainers on the farm.
So, yeah. So it's the same principle applies, just applies a little different. Yep.
What about put gypsum on it? Use it?
I usually, I mean, it's not needed typically.
Like when you first started, you got the hard pan, put the gypsum on.
Yeah, I don't know. It wouldn't really help your hard pan. I think no. I think it's more. You can get plants to take care of the hard pan. That soil will begin to heal itself. It does take time. That's what we tell farmers. If you've been kind of working the soil for 20 years, you got to give us a few years to get it back to something that's going to function better. So, but again, in the garden, you know, you can really speed that up. I think because we've got water and a lot of different plants we can work with. So a little easier on our scale. Yes,
So
ma'am.
you're suggesting not pulling your weeds?
I do pull mine. That is some disturbance, or I'll kind of use a trowel to undercut them. But sometimes I'll just leave them in the garden, you know, as long as they don't reroot themselves, but typically they won't, you know, and just leave that as mulch, as cover. as opposed to, I mean, often we'll just feed it to the chickens because they like green stuff, but sometimes I'll leave a pile of weeds in the garden that I hold just as mulch, because they'll wither and die, and they'll provide some cover. If you don't pull weeds, I mean, things like kochia and thistle become very nasty and make a lot of seed. Grasses probably, grasses and perennials like bindweed are my toughest weeds, I'd say. Grasses just creep in, and the bindweed has just been around for years and it's endemic, so it's in lawn, so that I have to keep after. But I think the hairy vetch, having that living covered mulch, really kept the bindweed down last year. Probably the thickest hairy vetch I've ever had was last year because we seeded so much. And that's technically hairy vetch is a biennial. It will overwinter and will make its own seed. So it kind of, if you plant it, plan on seeing it again. So if you're willing to deal with it, I think it's a nice addition. But again, it can be kind of viney and aggressive, but I just kind of rip it out when I don't like it in my tomatoes anymore. Throw it down on the ground as mulch. So.
And it helps keep the grass out.
Grasses, it might some, yeah. I mean, it's
just terrible. It's everywhere.
Yeah, and I did some, Roundup spraying last week in my garden. I did some grass patches and some other things I'm trying to deal with, and instead of ripping all that out and making a mess, I just went with the chemical. So, but hopefully don't have to do that too often. But it's, to me, a little herbicide can go a long way. So, you don't have to use a lot of it necessarily.
What do you recommend for like said thorns?
Oh, I don't have those in my garden. I don't know how, they come out of the ground fairly easy, do they?
They do, but
Yeah.
by the time, they're big enough to easily pull,
Yeah,
then the seeds drop off.
yeah.
And so,
Get
I
to
mean,
them
and
early.
then, there's no early, it's like they're here and then they're everywhere.
You leave for 3 days and suddenly,
We pulled 2 dumpsters full last summer.
wow. Yeah, if you can get it before it seeds.
Out of them, it's good, right?
Yeah. And you'll find, I mean, if you're not disturbing that soil, a lot of things eat seeds in the soil. If you let the system work, there's a lot of critters that go after those seeds. And
Well, the
seeds
grass
have
is taken in now.
Yeah.
So I think once the grass is
Mark, what weed was that?
goat's head,
Oh.
goat heads,
Right,
I don't have that problem. Mine's mostly bindweed and some grasses that are the most
Go ahead, not
problematic. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
How long does it take for mulch to make a significant difference in the depth? Like if you're doing a raised bed, I mean, does it grow like 1/10 of an inch in depth? Or
Your soil? Or, it certainly improves it. How much it actually adds to the level of the soil. It'd be pretty slow, because actually what happens to a lot of that mulch, it goes up in the air as carbon dioxide. Some of it gets locked down in the soil, but it's being processed by microbes and everything like we do. So a lot of it is gassed off as they eat and process it, but a lot of it does go below the ground. If you're chilling that under, then a lot of it goes up. So versus if you just put it down on the surface. So, it's going to take time. If you actually want to build a level up, that's a lot of organic material.
I'm wondering how much you need to
The leaf, well, if you've done compost and you start with a big pile like this, it shrinks, right? So it tends to go down because it must be eaten and processed and going on this carbon dioxide and just getting munched on. More questions or? All right.
Thank you for the questions.